Have you ever felt that precise moment when your entire world shifts, when someone you trusted completely reveals their true colors in the most devastating way possible? That moment came for me on what should have been the most romantic evening of the year, our 5th wedding anniversary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But instead of celebrating love, I discovered betrayal. Instead of receiving roses, I found evidence of lies. And instead of breaking down, I did something that would change all of our lives forever. I bought the company where both my cheating husband and his secretary worked, making myself their boss overnight. The look of pure shock on their faces when I walked into that Monday morning board meeting as the new majority owner was worth every penny I spent to acquire those shares. My name is Rachel Thompson, though for 5 years I carried the name Rachel Chen, thinking it represented a partnership built on love and mutual respect. How naive I was to believe that marriage meant facing life as equals, supporting each other's dreams while building something beautiful together. I learned the hard way that some people view marriage as nothing more than a convenient arrangement, a comfortable facade that hides their true intentions. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Tempe, Arizona, where my father worked as an accountant and my mother taught elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they understood the value of education and sacrifice. Every dollar they saved went toward my college fund, determined that their daughter would have opportunities they never had. I was the first in my family to attend Arizona State University, where I earned my degree in finance with highest honors. Those late nights studying while working part-time jobs to pay for textbooks taught me discipline and determination that would serve me well in the years to come. After graduation, I started as a junior financial analyst at a small investment firm in downtown Phoenix. The work was demanding, the hours brutal, but I had a natural talent for seeing patterns in market data that others missed. I could identify undervalued companies with strong fundamentals, predict market shifts before they became obvious to everyone else. Within 3 years, I had earned my CFA certification and was managing portfolios for high-net-worth clients who trusted my judgment implicitly. By age 28, I had saved enough to start my own investment consultancy. The freedom was intoxicating, choosing my own clients, setting my own schedule, keeping the profits from my successful recommendations instead of watching senior partners claim credit for my work. My client list grew through word of mouth, wealthy individuals and small institutions who appreciated my careful research and consistent returns. I wasn't getting rich quickly, but I was building something sustainable, something that belonged entirely to me. That's when I met David Chen at a networking event for young professionals in Scottsdale. He was charming in that effortless way. Some men possess tall and well-dressed with an easy smile that made everyone around him feel important. David worked as a project manager for Pinnacle Tech Solutions, a growing software company that specialized in business automation systems. He wasn't the most successful person in the room, but he had ambition and a way of talking about his future that made you want to be part of it. Our courtship was everything you read about in romance novels: candlelit dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Sedona, thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention to my interests. David seemed genuinely impressed by my career, often asking about my investment strategies and introducing me to his friends as the brilliant woman who's going to make us all rich someday. I was flattered by his attention, touched by what I interpreted as respect for my professional accomplishments. We married after an 18-month engagement, a beautiful ceremony at the Phoenician resort with 200 guests celebrating our union. David's parents had flown in from California, proud of their son for finding such an accomplished wife. My parents beamed with joy, seeing their daughter marry a man who seemed to value her mind as much as her heart. The reception was elegant, the honeymoon in Maui magical. Everything seemed perfect. The first few years of marriage followed a comfortable pattern. I continued building my investment practice while David climbed the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Tech Solutions. We bought a beautiful home in Scottsdale with mountain views, furnished it with carefully chosen pieces that reflected both our tastes. I thought we were building a life together, creating the foundation for decades of partnership and shared success. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. David had a way of diminishing my achievements in subtle ways, making jokes about my little investment hobby when we were with his colleagues. He would interrupt when I was discussing market trends with other professionals, steering the conversation toward topics where he could dominate. At dinner parties, he'd introduce me as my wife Rachel, rather than mentioning my professional credentials, as if my identity existed solely in relation to him. But the biggest red flag was how he handled our finances. Despite my expertise in investments and financial planning, David insisted on managing all our joint accounts. He claimed it was simpler to have one person handling the bills and investment decisions, that my time was better spent focusing on my clients rather than our personal finances. I agreed, thinking it showed trust and partnership. I had no idea he was using our joint accounts to fund expensive dinners and weekend getaways that I wasn't part of. By our 4th anniversary, I had begun to notice changes in David's behavior. He worked later hours, took more business trips, seemed distracted even when we were together. When I asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. He stopped asking about my work, stopped showing interest in the investment opportunities I was excited about. Our conversations grew shorter and more superficial, as if we were polite roommates rather than husband and wife. The intimacy disappeared gradually, so slowly that I almost didn't notice until it was completely gone. David claimed stress from work was affecting his mood, that a big promotion was within reach if he could just focus completely on his career for a while. I supported him, thinking this was what good wives did, sacrificing their own needs temporarily for their husband's success. I convinced myself that once his career stabilized, we would reconnect and recapture what we had lost. During this time, my own business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I had developed a reputation among Phoenix's wealthy elite as the investment advisor who could deliver consistent returns even in volatile markets. My client base included tech entrepreneurs, real estate developers, and established business owners, who trusted me with significant portions of their wealth. The fees I earned allowed me to live comfortably, but more importantly, I was accumulating substantial savings and investment holdings of my own. One client, in particular, had become both personally and professionally significant. Monica Bailey was a successful entrepreneur who had sold her marketing agency for $40 million and needed someone to help her manage her newfound wealth. Monica was sharp, direct, and had no patience for financial advisors who talked down to her or assumed she didn't understand complex investment strategies. We clicked immediately, both professionally and personally, developing a friendship that extended beyond our business relationship. Monica often invited me to social events where I met other successful women who had built their own fortunes. These women were different from the wives in David's social circle, who seemed to define themselves primarily through their husbands' achievements. Monica and her friends had their own power, their own money, their own opinions about everything, from politics to business strategy. Spending time with them reminded me of who I had been before marriage, the confident woman who had built her own career and answered to no one. It was Monica who first suggested that something might be wrong in my marriage. She had a talent for reading people, honed through years of building and selling businesses, and she noticed things I had trained myself to overlook. "Rachel," she said during one of our monthly dinners, "when was the last time David asked about your work? When was the last time he seemed genuinely interested in what you're doing?" I deflected her concerns, making excuses about David's work stress and the demands of his career. But her questions planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger with each passing day. I began paying closer attention to David's behavior, noticing how he checked his phone constantly during our conversations, how he took calls in the other room, how he seemed to have developed an extensive social life that didn't include me. The breaking point came on our 5th wedding anniversary, February 14th. I had made reservations at Elements, the rooftop restaurant at the Phoenician where we had celebrated our engagement. I spent the afternoon at the spa, getting my hair styled and selecting the perfect dress, a deep blue silk that David had always loved. I wanted to recreate the romance of our early relationship, to remind us both of why we had fallen in love. David was supposed to meet me at the restaurant at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, he hadn't arrived, and my calls were going straight to voicemail. The hostess kept asking if I wanted to be seated, clearly uncomfortable with my growing embarrassment as other couples were shown to their tables. I finally accepted a glass of wine at the bar, telling myself there must be a work emergency that was keeping him. At 8:30, David finally answered his phone. His voice was strained, distracted, with background noise that sounded like music and conversation. "Rachel, I'm so sorry, but I can't make it tonight. We have a crisis at work, and I need to stay late to handle it. Can we reschedule for this weekend?" Something in his tone didn't ring true. David was many things, but he had never been a convincing liar. The background noise didn't sound like an office crisis, and I could swear I heard a woman's laughter very close to his voice. "What kind of crisis?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's complicated," he said quickly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Technical problems with our biggest client's system. I'll explain later, but I really need to focus on this right now. I'll make it up to you, I promise. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting alone at the bar of an expensive restaurant on our anniversary, wearing my best dress and fighting back tears of humiliation and growing suspicion. The bartender, a kind woman about my age, noticed my distress and quietly refilled my wine glass without charge. "Men," she said simply, and somehow that small gesture of solidarity made me feel less alone. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing, with possibilities I didn't want to consider. David's explanation didn't make sense. Pinnacle Tech had dedicated crisis teams for system failures, and project managers weren't typically the ones working through the night to fix technical problems. More troubling was the casual way he had dismissed our anniversary, as if 5 years of marriage meant nothing compared to whatever was keeping him busy that evening. At home, I tried to distract myself with work, reviewing portfolio reports, and researching potential investments for my clients. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone for messages from David, alternating between worry that something terrible had happened and growing certainty that he was lying to me about where he was. Around midnight, I heard David's car in the driveway. I pretended to be asleep when he came into the bedroom, but I was acutely aware of how he moved carefully in the darkness, trying not to wake me. He showered before coming to bed, which struck me as odd for someone who had supposedly spent the evening hunched over computer systems in a crisis situation. The next morning, David was full of apologies and explanations. The client emergency had been resolved, but it had taken all night and most of the technical team to fix the problems. He felt terrible about missing our anniversary dinner and wanted to make it up to me with a special weekend in Sedona. His story was detailed and convincing, exactly the kind of explanation that would have satisfied me in the past. But something had shifted in my perception. Maybe it was Monica's questions about David's behavior, or maybe it was the simple fact that he had abandoned me on our anniversary without seeming genuinely upset about it. I found myself studying his face as he spoke, looking for tells that might reveal deception. What I saw was a man who was working very hard to appear sincere, rather than someone who was naturally distressed about disappointing his wife. Over the next few weeks, I began paying closer attention to David's patterns. He claimed to be working late several nights each week, but when I called his office, I was told he had already left for the day. He received frequent text messages. That made him smile in ways I hadn't seen in months, always explaining them as communications from colleagues or clients. He started taking better care of his appearance, upgrading his wardrobe and spending more time at the gym, changes he attributed to wanting to look professional for important meetings. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Grace Kim, my assistant who helped manage scheduling and client communications, mentioned that she had seen David at a restaurant in downtown Phoenix during what should have been his work hours. Grace was naturally observant, a quality that made her excellent at her job, and she had noticed David because he was with an attractive blonde woman who definitely wasn't me. I didn't want to say anything, Grace told me carefully, because I thought maybe it was a work dinner or client meeting, but they seemed very friendly, if you know what I mean. Holding hands across the table, sharing food, the kind of intimate behavior you usually see with couples. My heart sank, even as my mind raced to find innocent explanations. Maybe David was meeting with a female client who preferred informal settings for business discussions. Maybe the hand-holding was a misinterpretation of professional courtesy. But deep down, I knew Grace's observations confirmed what I had been trying to avoid acknowledging. That evening, I confronted David directly. Grace saw you at lunch today, with a blonde woman. She said you looked very comfortable together. I watched his face carefully, looking for the immediate denial or reasonable explanation that would ease my fears. Instead, I saw guilt flash across his features before he composed himself. "Oh, that," he said, as if he had completely forgotten about it. That was Amanda Foster, the CEO's executive assistant. We were discussing some upcoming client presentations, and she suggested meeting somewhere quieter than the office. Amanda Foster. The name meant nothing to me, but something about the way David said it, too casual, too rehearsed, made my stomach clench with dread. "She's Richard Hayes' assistant?" I asked, referring to Pinnacle Tech's CEO. "Right," David confirmed. "She's been really helpful with organizing materials for my project presentations. Smart woman, great at anticipating what executives need to hear." The explanation was plausible, but it didn't address the intimate behavior Grace had observed. "Grace said you were holding hands," I pressed. David laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's ridiculous. We might have reached across the table to share documents or something, but holding hands? Come on, Rachel. You know Grace tends to be dramatic about everything." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me. His explanation hadn't satisfied me, partly because it required believing that Grace had completely misinterpreted what she saw, and partly because David's behavior over the past months suddenly made perfect sense if he was having an affair. The next day, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. Monica had mentioned using one during her divorce years earlier, recommending a discreet professional who specialized in marital investigations. I felt sick about violating David's privacy, but I needed to know the truth before I could decide how to handle the situation. Within a week, I had my answer. The investigator's report included photographs, credit card records, and detailed timelines that painted an unmistakable picture of infidelity. David and Amanda Foster had been having an affair for over 6 months, meeting regularly at hotels, restaurants, and her apartment during times when David claimed to be working late or traveling for business. The photos showed them kissing, holding hands, and displaying the kind of affection that had disappeared from our marriage months ago. The financial records were equally damning. David had been using our joint credit cards to pay for expensive dinners, hotel rooms, and gifts that weren't for me. The business expenses he had claimed were actually romantic getaways with Amanda, charged to accounts that I helped fund through my own earnings. Reading that report felt like being punched in the stomach by someone you trusted completely. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, using money I had earned to fund his relationship with another woman. Every late night, every canceled dinner, every excuse about work stress had been a lie designed to give him time with Amanda while keeping me unsuspecting and supportive. But as the initial shock and hurt began to fade, another emotion took its place: cold, calculating anger. David hadn't just cheated on me. He had systematically deceived me while using my own resources to fund his deception. He had made me complicit in my own betrayal, and that realization ignited a fury I had never experienced before. I spent the weekend alone, David claiming another business trip that I now knew was a romantic getaway with Amanda. During those quiet hours, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't going to confront David with tears and accusations. I wasn't going to beg him to choose me over his secretary. I was going to show him exactly who he had betrayed, and the cost of underestimating Rachel Thompson. Because David had forgotten something crucial about the woman he married. I wasn't just a supportive wife. I was a successful investor with substantial resources and connections throughout Phoenix's business community. I had been building wealth and influence while he was playing office romance, accumulating assets he knew nothing about through careful investments and client relationships. Most importantly, I had been quietly researching Pinnacle Tech Solutions for months, initially as a potential investment opportunity for my clients. The company was privately held but looking to expand, with several major shareholders who might be interested in selling their stakes to the right buyer. I had done extensive due diligence on their financials, market position, and growth prospects. David and Amanda thought they were so clever, carrying on their affair right under everyone's noses. They had no idea that their betrayal was about to cost them far more than their marriage and relationship. It was about to cost them their careers, their reputations, and their comfortable assumption that actions don't have consequences. The plan that formed in my mind over that weekend was audacious, expensive, and absolutely perfect. If David wanted to choose his secretary over his wife, I would make sure he could spend every day working for the woman he had betrayed. Amanda Foster wanted to break up marriages and steal other women's husbands. She could explain her behavior to her new boss, me. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I was going to buy Pinnacle Tech Solutions, making myself the owner of the company where both David and Amanda worked. Let them try to continue their affair when I controlled their paychecks, their work environment, and their professional futures. The best part was that neither of them would see it coming. They thought they knew me, the supportive wife, the understanding partner, the woman who would quietly accept whatever crumbs of attention they threw her way. They were about to discover that they didn't know Rachel Thompson at all. Monday morning arrived with the crisp February air that made Phoenix winters so appealing to those escaping harsher climates. While David prepared for another day of what he believed was successful deception, I was already 3 steps ahead, sitting in my home office reviewing financial documents that would have shocked him if he had bothered to pay attention to my business over the past 5 years. The truth was that David had never truly understood the scope of my success. He saw me working from home, taking calls with clients, managing what he dismissively called my investment consulting, but he had no comprehension of the wealth I had been steadily accumulating. While he was focused on climbing the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Tech Solutions, earning his respectable but modest project manager salary, I had been building an investment portfolio that would have made him dizzy if he had ever asked to see the numbers. My client base had grown far beyond what David realized. What started as managing portfolios for wealthy individuals had evolved into something much more substantial. I now served as investment advisor to 3 family offices, managed pension funds for 2 labor unions, and provided strategic financial guidance to a dozen high-net-worth entrepreneurs throughout Arizona and California. The fees from these relationships, combined with my own successful investments, had created a personal net worth that exceeded 8 figures. The beauty of my financial position was its invisibility. David saw our joint checking account, which contained enough money for our comfortable lifestyle, but nothing that would suggest extraordinary wealth. He saw me working from home, taking calls at reasonable hours, living what appeared to be a balanced life between career and marriage. What he didn't see were the multiple business entities I had established, the offshore accounts that held my most significant assets, and the carefully diversified investment portfolio that generated more passive income each month than his annual salary. This wasn't accidental obscurity. I had learned early in my career that displaying wealth could complicate client relationships and personal interactions. People treated you differently when they knew you had serious money, and not always in positive ways. So I had developed a talent for living well without living ostentatiously, accumulating assets while maintaining the appearance of upper-middle-class success rather than genuine wealth. Monica Bailey was one of the few people who understood the true scope of my financial capabilities. As my friend and largest client, she had watched me grow from a talented analyst into a sophisticated investor with the resources to make significant acquisitions. During our regular Thursday lunch at the Phoenician, I shared my discovery of David's affair and the plan that had been forming in my mind. "You want to buy Pinnacle Tech Solutions?" Monica asked, setting down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. Her expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. "Rachel, that's not just revenge. That's a hostile takeover of your husband's workplace. Are you sure you've thought this through completely?" I pulled out a folder containing the research I had been conducting for months. I've been analyzing Pinnacle Tech as a potential investment opportunity since last summer. The company has strong fundamentals, excellent growth prospects, and several major shareholders who have been quietly exploring exit strategies. This isn't an emotional decision disguised as a business move, Monica. It's a sound investment that happens to solve a personal problem. The numbers supported my assessment. Pinnacle Tech Solutions had been founded 12 years earlier by Richard Hayes, a former IBM executive who saw opportunities in the growing market for business automation software. The company had grown steadily, building a reputation for reliable products and excellent customer service. Their client base included mid-sized businesses throughout the Southwest, government agencies, and several Fortune 500 companies that used Pinnacle's software for everything from inventory management to employee scheduling. Financially, Pinnacle was healthy but not spectacular. Annual revenues had grown consistently but not dramatically, reaching approximately $52 million in the previous fiscal year. Profits were solid, though not exceptional, reflecting Hayes's conservative management style and focus on sustainable growth rather than rapid expansion. The company employed just over 200 people, making it substantial enough to be impressive, but small enough to be manageable for a new owner with the right resources. More importantly for my purposes, Pinnacle Tech was privately held by a small group of investors. Richard Hayes owned 40% of the company, having diluted his original stake through several funding rounds over the years. A venture capital firm held 25%, two other early investors owned 15% each, and the remaining 5% was distributed among key employees through an incentive program. My research had revealed that the venture capital firm was actively seeking to exit their position, having held their shares for nearly 8 years and needing liquidity for other investments. One of the early investors, a real estate developer named Carl Morrison, was facing financial pressure from some struggling projects and had quietly retained a business broker to explore selling his stake. The other early investor, Margaret Torres, was 73 years old and wanted to simplify her financial affairs before passing wealth to her children. This created an opportunity that went beyond simple revenge. If I could acquire the stakes held by the venture capital firm and the two early investors, I would control 55% of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, making me the majority owner, and giving me complete control over company operations. Hayes would remain as a minority shareholder and CEO, assuming I chose to keep him in that role, but ultimate authority would rest with me. The financial requirements were substantial but manageable. Based on my analysis of comparable companies and Pinnacle's financial performance, I estimated that acquiring controlling interest would cost between $35 and $45 million. This represented a significant portion of my net worth, but not an irresponsible percentage. More importantly, The investment appeared sound regardless of personal motivations. Pinnacle Tech was well-positioned for growth, and I had ideas for strategic improvements that could increase both revenues and profitability. Monica reviewed my analysis with the careful attention of someone who had built and sold multiple businesses. She understood the numbers, appreciated the strategic logic, and recognized the quality of my research. "From a pure business perspective," she said finally, "this looks like a smart acquisition. The company is undervalued, the market is growing, and you have the expertise to optimize their operations. The personal element just makes it more satisfying." That afternoon, I began making the phone calls that would set my plan in motion. My first contact was Stephen Walsh, the attorney who had handled my business formations and major transactions over the years. Stephen was discreet, thorough, and unflappable, qualities that had made him popular among Phoenix's entrepreneurial community. He listened to my acquisition proposal without surprise or judgment, asking only the practical questions necessary to structure the deal properly. "You'll want to use a Delaware corporation for the acquisition," Stephen advised. "Keep your personal ownership obscured until after the transaction closes. We can set up a shell company that acquires the shares, then transfers them to an entity you control once everything is finalized. That way, neither Hayes nor your husband will know who's buying the company until you choose to reveal yourself." This approach appealed to me for several reasons. David and Amanda would have no advance warning that their comfortable work environment was about to change dramatically. Hayes would negotiate with what appeared to be a serious but anonymous buyer, focusing on business terms rather than personal relationships. Most importantly, I would maintain complete control over the timing and circumstances of my reveal, choosing the moment for maximum impact. The next call was to Thomas Rivera, a business broker who specialized in technology company acquisitions. Thomas had a reputation for discretion and effectiveness, having facilitated several major deals in the Phoenix market over the past decade. I explained that I represented a client interested in acquiring a controlling stake in Pinnacle Tech Solutions, emphasizing the need for confidentiality throughout the process. "Pinnacle Tech is a quality company," Thomas confirmed. "Hayes has built something solid there, though I think they could be more aggressive about expansion. The ownership structure you described creates a real opportunity for someone with the right resources and strategic vision. I can reach out to the shareholders you mentioned, gauge their interest in selling without revealing who's asking." Within a week, Thomas had encouraging news. The venture capital firm was indeed eager to exit their position, quoting a price that valued their 25% stake at $12 million. Carl Morrison was motivated to sell quickly due to his financial pressures, asking for $7 million for his 15% ownership. Margaret Torres was more sentimental about her investment, but ultimately practical about her estate planning needs, indicating she would accept $6.5 million for her 15% stake. The total acquisition cost would be $25.5 million, less than my most conservative estimate and well within my financial capabilities. Stephen began drafting the legal documents necessary to structure the acquisition, while I arranged financing that would preserve my liquidity for post-acquisition improvements and strategic initiatives. During this process, I maintained my normal routine with David, giving no indication that anything had changed in my perspective or plans. I continued accepting his explanations for late nights and weekend work commitments, responding to his occasional gestures of affection with appropriate warmth, and behaving like the supportive wife he expected me to be. The performance required considerable self-control, but I was motivated by the knowledge that his deception would soon have consequences he couldn't imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's affair had actually created the perfect conditions for my acquisition plan. His distraction and guilt made him less attentive to my activities, less likely to ask questions about my phone calls or meetings. His focus on Amanda Foster meant he wasn't monitoring our finances carefully, so he didn't notice the movement of funds necessary to prepare for the Pinnacle Tech purchase. His lies about working late gave me additional time to coordinate with, Stephen, Thomas, and the various professionals helping to structure the deal. Grace Kim, my assistant, proved invaluable during this period. Her organizational skills and attention to detail helped me manage the complex timeline of legal documents, financial transfers, and stakeholder communications without missing any critical deadlines. Grace also served as a buffer between me and routine client matters, ensuring that my regular business operations continued smoothly while I focused on the acquisition. "This is the most complicated transaction I've ever helped coordinate," Grace told me one afternoon as we reviewed the latest draft of the purchase agreements. "Are you sure you want to take on the responsibility of running a tech company? It's going to be completely different from investment consulting." Her question was valid, and one I had considered carefully. Running Pinnacle Tech Solutions would require skills beyond financial analysis and investment strategy. I would need to understand software development, client relationships, employee management, and technology market dynamics. The company had over 200 employees whose livelihoods would depend on my decisions, existing client relationships that needed nurturing, and competitive pressures that required strategic responses. But I had been preparing for this challenge longer than Grace realized. My investment consulting work had given me deep exposure to technology companies, from startups seeking venture capital to established firms looking to optimize their financial performance. I understood the metrics that drove tech company valuations, the operational challenges that constrained growth, and the strategic opportunities that created competitive advantages. More importantly, I had built relationships with executives, consultants, and advisors who could provide guidance as I transitioned from investor to operator. Monica Bailey had offered to serve as an informal advisor, sharing insights from her own experience building and running technology companies. "The key," she told me, "is surrounding yourself with people who know what they're doing and aren't afraid to tell you when you're wrong. Don't try to micromanage everything, but don't delegate so much that you lose control of the strategic direction." By the third week of February, all the pieces were falling into place. The 3 selling shareholders had agreed to terms, the legal documentation was nearly complete, and financing arrangements were finalized. Thomas Rivera had negotiated a 30-day due diligence period, giving me access to Pinnacle Tech's detailed financial records, operational data, and strategic plans. This information would be crucial for planning the company's future direction, and more immediately, for understanding exactly what roles David and Amanda played in the organization. The Karen due diligence process revealed several interesting details about Pinnacle Tech's operations. David's role as a senior project manager was more significant than I had realized, with responsibility for coordinating software implementations at some of the company's largest clients. His performance reviews were consistently positive, describing him as reliable, detail-oriented, and effective at managing complex client relationships. Amanda Foster's position as executive assistant to the CEO gave her access to sensitive information about company strategy, financial performance, and personnel matters. What the due diligence didn't reveal, but what I suspected, was that David and Amanda's affair represented a serious breach of company policy. Pinnacle Tech's employee handbook contained clear guidelines about workplace relationships, requiring disclosure of romantic involvement between employees, especially when one party held authority over the other or had access to confidential information. Their secret relationship violated these policies and potentially exposed the company to liability if other employees became aware of preferential treatment or hostile work environment issues. This policy violation would give me additional leverage once I assumed control of the company. David and Amanda hadn't just betrayed their spouses and violated their marriage vows. They had also violated their employment agreements and, potentially, exposed their employer to legal risk. As the new owner, I would have both the authority and the responsibility to address this situation appropriately. Stephen Walsh scheduled the closing for Friday, March 2nd, exactly 2 weeks after my discovery of David's affair. The timing was deliberate, giving me a weekend to prepare for my first appearance at Pinnacle Tech as its new majority owner. I planned to attend the Monday morning executive staff meeting, where Richard Hayes would introduce me to the senior management team and announce the ownership change to the broader organization. The financial transfers required for the acquisition were complex, but proceeded smoothly. Funds moved from my various investment accounts into the Delaware corporation Stephen had established, then into escrow accounts controlled by Thomas Rivera's firm. Legal documents were signed, stock certificates transferred, and regulatory filings completed. By Friday afternoon, I owned controlling interest in Pinnacle Tech Solutions, making me David's ultimate boss and Amanda's new employer. That evening, David came home from work in an unusually good mood, chatting about weekend plans and suggesting we finally reschedule the anniversary dinner we had missed 2 weeks earlier. I smiled and agreed, thinking that our conversation would indeed be memorable, though not for the reasons he anticipated. Saturday morning brought a phone call from Richard Hayes, Pinnacle Tech's CEO and now my minority partner. Hayes wanted to arrange a meeting to discuss his transition strategy and to understand my vision for the company's future direction. His tone was respectful but cautious, reflecting the uncertainty that any executive would feel when his company was acquired by an unknown entity. "I appreciate you keeping me on as CEO," Hayes said. "I've built this company from nothing, and I want to ensure its continued success under new ownership. I'm hoping we can meet early next week to discuss how you'd like to handle the transition announcement and what changes you're planning for operations." I agreed to meet with Hayes on Monday morning before the executive staff meeting, giving us time to coordinate our approach and ensuring that the announcement would proceed smoothly. What I didn't tell Hayes was that I planned to use that meeting to discuss personnel matters that would directly affect 2 of his employees. The weekend passed quietly, with David unaware that his life was about to change dramatically. He spent Saturday afternoon at what he claimed was a client meeting, but which I knew was another rendezvous with Amanda. He returned home relaxed and affectionate, perhaps feeling guilty about his deception or maybe just satisfied with his double life. I responded with appropriate warmth, knowing that this would be one of our final interactions as husband and wife. Sunday evening, I prepared for Monday's meeting with the care of a general planning a decisive battle. I selected a tailored navy suit that projected authority without ostentation, reviewed my notes about Pinnacle Tech's operations and personnel, and mentally rehearsed the conversation I would have with Hayes about addressing workplace relationship policies. I also prepared a folder containing the private investigator's report, photographic evidence of David and Amanda's affair, and documentation of the policy violations their relationship represented. As I went to bed Sunday night, with David sleeping peacefully beside me, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 weeks. I had discovered the betrayal of someone I trusted completely, uncovered financial deception that had funded his infidelity, and responded by acquiring the company where both perpetrators worked. In less than 12 hours, I would walk into Pinnacle Tech Solutions as its new majority owner, ready to confront the people who had betrayed me and forever alter the comfortable assumptions that had governed their lives. The woman who had been humiliated at an anniversary dinner was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. David and Amanda thought they had been so clever, carrying on their affair while maintaining their professional reputations and personal relationships. They were about to discover that actions have consequences, and that the quiet, supportive wife they had taken for granted was actually someone they should have treated with considerably more respect. Monday morning arrived with the desert sunshine that made Phoenix's business district gleam like polished copper. I drove to Pinnacle Tech Solutions in my Mercedes, taking a route that would be familiar within weeks as I established my routine as the company's new owner. The building was a gleaming glass tower in the Camelback Mountain corridor, housing several technology companies that had chosen Phoenix for its growing tech ecosystem and business-friendly environment. My first stop was the executive floor, where Richard Hayes waited in his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Valley of the Sun. Hayes was exactly what I expected from a former IBM executive: polished, professional, and careful in his manner. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of navigating corporate environments successfully. "Ms. Thompson," Hayes greeted me, rising from behind his desk with a handshake that was firm but not overwhelming. "I have to admit, I'm curious about your background and your plans for Pinnacle Tech. The acquisition happened faster than I expected, and I want to make sure we're aligned on the company's future direction." I took the offered seat across from his desk, noting the family photos, industry awards, and strategic planning documents that decorated his workspace. This was clearly a man who took his responsibilities seriously and had invested significant personal capital in building Pinnacle Tech's reputation and success. "I appreciate your dedication to the company," I began, pulling out a folder containing my preliminary assessment of Pinnacle Tech's operations. "I've been studying your business for several months, and I'm impressed by what you've built. My intention is to accelerate growth while maintaining the quality and customer service that have made Pinnacle Tech successful." Hayes relaxed slightly, clearly relieved that I wasn't planning immediate dramatic changes or personnel reductions. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. We have a strong foundation, but I've been conservative about expansion because we didn't have the capital, resources for aggressive growth. With your investment, we could pursue opportunities that were previously beyond our reach." We spent the next hour discussing strategic priorities, market opportunities, and operational challenges. Hayes was knowledgeable and thoughtful, confirming my assessment that keeping him as CEO was the right decision. He understood the company's strengths and weaknesses, had relationships with key clients and employees, and possessed the industry expertise that would be valuable as we pursued growth opportunities. As our conversation progressed, I steered the discussion toward personnel matters and company policies. "I want to ensure that Pinnacle Tech maintains the highest standards of professional conduct," I said carefully. "Have there been any issues with workplace relationships or policy violations that I should be aware of?" Hayes frowned slightly, considering the question. "We have clear policies about workplace relationships, requiring disclosure and management approval to avoid conflicts of interest. As far as I know, we haven't had any significant issues, though I suppose it's possible that relationships could develop without coming to management's attention." This was the opening I needed. I pulled out the private investigator's report and placed it on Hayes's desk. "I have reason to believe that 2 of your employees have been involved in an undisclosed romantic relationship that violates company policy. David Chen, one of your project managers, and Amanda Foster, your executive assistant." Hayes's expression shifted from puzzlement to concern as he opened the folder and began reviewing the evidence. The photographs were clear and unambiguous, showing David and Amanda in intimate settings that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The timeline established that their affair had been ongoing for months, conducted during work hours and in some cases using company resources. "This is unexpected," Hayes said slowly, studying the evidence with the careful attention of someone who understood the potential legal and operational implications. "Amanda has access to confidential information about company strategy and personnel matters. David manages relationships with some of our most important clients. An undisclosed relationship between them creates multiple potential conflicts of interest." I nodded gravely. "It also represents a clear violation of the professional conduct standards outlined in your employee handbook. As the new majority owner, I'm concerned about the liability this creates for the company and the message it sends to other employees about accountability for policy violations." Hayes closed the folder and looked at me directly. "How do you want to handle this situation? Both employees have been valuable contributors to the company, but you're right that this represents a serious policy violation that needs to be addressed." The question I had been waiting for. I had spent considerable time thinking about how to handle David and Amanda's employment status in a way that was professionally appropriate while still addressing the personal betrayal they represented. My decision was based on business considerations, rather than revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction it would provide. I think we need to terminate both employees, I said firmly. The policy violation is clear, the potential liability is significant, and maintaining their employment would undermine our ability to enforce professional conduct standards with other staff members. However, I want to handle this in a way that protects the company from potential legal claims. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. We can offer severance packages contingent on signed agreements not to pursue legal action against the company. Document everything carefully, involve HR in the process, and make sure we follow all applicable employment laws. It's not going to be pleasant, but you're right that we can't ignore clear policy violations. We agreed that Hayes would coordinate with the HR director to prepare the termination paperwork while I attended the executive staff meeting. The terminations would be handled that afternoon, giving us time to prepare appropriate documentation and ensure that the process was legally sound. Both David and Amanda would be escorted from the building immediately after their termination meetings, with their computer access revoked and company property recovered. The executive staff meeting was held in Pinnacle Tech's main conference room, a space designed to impress clients with its floor-to-ceiling windows, polished conference table, and state-of-the-art presentation technology. Hayes had assembled his senior team: the VP of Sales, the Chief Technology Officer, the Director of Human Resources, the Chief Financial Officer, and 3 other department heads who oversaw key operational areas. I want to introduce you to Rachel Thompson, Hayes began, who has acquired a controlling interest in Pinnacle Tech Solutions. Rachel will be taking an active role in the company's strategic direction, and I'll be working closely with her to ensure a smooth transition and continued growth. The reactions around the table were varied but universally surprised. None of the executives had been aware that Hayes was considering selling his controlling stake, and the news that the company now had a new majority owner was clearly unexpected. I had prepared for this moment, knowing that establishing credibility with the senior team would be crucial for effective leadership. Thank you, Richard, I said, standing to address the group. I'm excited to be working with all of you to build on the foundation you've created. Pinnacle Tech has an excellent reputation and strong market position, but I believe we have opportunities for significant growth that we haven't fully explored. I spent the next 30 minutes outlining my preliminary assessment of the company's strategic opportunities, market position, and competitive advantages. My presentation drew on months of research and analysis, demonstrating knowledge of the industry, understanding of client needs, and familiarity with technology trends that could affect Pinnacle Tech's future success. The questions from the executive team were probing but respectful, testing my understanding of their business while gauging my leadership style and strategic vision. I answered confidently, drawing on my background in financial analysis and investment strategy to address their concerns about funding growth initiatives, managing risk, and maintaining operational excellence during a period of expansion. One thing I want to emphasize, I concluded, is that I believe in accountability and professional standards. Pinnacle Tech has built its reputation on reliability and ethical business practices, and I intend to maintain those standards in all aspects of our operations. The meeting concluded with individual discussions about each department's priorities and challenges. I was particularly interested in understanding the client relationships that David managed, ensuring that his termination wouldn't disrupt service to important accounts. The VP of Sales assured me that other project managers could absorb David's responsibilities with minimal client impact, especially if we handled the transition carefully. After the executive meeting, I returned to Hayes's office to finalize the termination process. The HR director, Linda Martinez, had prepared the necessary paperwork and coordinated with building security to ensure that David and Amanda could be escorted from the premises without creating a disturbance. Both employees had been asked to attend separate meetings at 3 p.m., ostensibly to discuss their roles in the company's transition under new ownership. Are you planning to attend these meetings? Hayes asked. It might be more appropriate For Linda and me to handle the terminations while you maintain some distance from the process. I considered his suggestion carefully. From a business perspective, Hayes was probably right that my presence might complicate the termination process or create additional legal exposure. But from a personal perspective, I wanted David and Amanda to understand exactly why they were losing their jobs and who was responsible for the consequences of their actions. I think I should be present, I decided. As the new majority owner, I want to demonstrate that policy violations have consequences and that professional conduct standards will be enforced consistently. My presence will underscore the seriousness of the situation. The afternoon passed slowly as I toured the Pinnacle Tech facilities, meeting employees and observing operations. The company occupied 3 floors of the building, with software developers on one floor, sales and marketing on another, and administrative functions on the third. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, with the kind of collaborative energy that characterized successful technology companies. Several employees mentioned David during my tour, describing him as a capable project manager who was well liked by clients and colleagues. A few people asked about Amanda, noting that she hadn't been at her desk that morning and wondering if she was ill. I responded non-committally, knowing that both employees would be gone before the end of the day. At 2:45 p.m., I positioned myself in Hayes's office, where we could observe the conference room where David's termination meeting would take place. Through the glass walls, I watched as David entered the room looking relaxed and confident, clearly expecting a routine discussion about his role under new ownership. He was wearing a well-tailored suit that I had probably paid for, looking every inch the successful professional who had no idea his world was about to collapse. Hayes and Linda Martinez entered the conference room, carrying folders containing the termination paperwork and evidence of policy violations. I remained in Hayes's office, visible through the glass, but not participating directly in the conversation. David noticed me immediately, his expression shifting from confidence to puzzlement as he tried to understand why his wife was present at his workplace. Even from a distance, I could see the moment when Hayes presented the evidence of David's affair with Amanda. David's face went pale, then flushed red as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. His mouth moved as if he was trying to speak, but no sound emerged. The folder containing photographs and documentation remained open on the table, between them creating an undeniable record of his professional misconduct. Linda Martinez was explaining the company's policies and the consequences of their violation, while Hayes maintained the serious demeanor appropriate for such a conversation. David's eyes kept shifting between the termination documents and my position in Hayes's office, clearly understanding that his wife's presence was not coincidental. The conversation lasted approximately 15 minutes, during which David signed the required paperwork and surrendered his company laptop, access cards, and other property. Security personnel arrived to escort him from the building, a standard procedure for terminated employees who had access to sensitive information. David walked past Hayes's office on his way to the elevator, making eye contact with me through the glass wall. His expression was a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning realization that his comfortable assumptions about his marriage and career had just been shattered. Amanda's termination meeting followed a similar pattern, though her reaction was more emotional than David's had been. She cried when presented with the evidence of her policy violations, tried to argue that her relationship with David didn't affect her professional performance, and asked repeatedly why I was present during what should have been a private personnel matter. Hayes remained professional throughout the process, explaining that policy violations required consistent enforcement regardless of individual circumstances or personal relationships. Linda Martinez handled the paperwork efficiently, ensuring that Amanda understood the terms of her severance agreement and the legal implications of violating its confidentiality provisions. As Amanda was escorted from the building, she passed Hayes's office and saw me watching through the glass wall. Unlike David, who had seemed primarily shocked by the turn of events, Amanda's expression showed pure fury. She had clearly realized that I was responsible for her termination and that her affair with David had cost her considerably more than just her marriage. By 4 p.m., both David and Amanda had been removed from Pinnacle Tech's premises, their computer access revoked, and their personal belongings packed for pickup. The other employees had been informed that both individuals had left the company for personal reasons, with their responsibilities being redistributed among other team members. The transition was handled professionally, without creating drama or disrupting daily operations. Hayes and I debriefed in his office as the sun began setting over the Phoenix skyline. "That was handled well," he said, organizing the documentation from both termination meetings. "Both employees signed their severance agreements, so we shouldn't have legal complications. The evidence you provided made it impossible for them to dispute the policy violations." I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The day had accomplished exactly what I intended. David and Amanda had faced consequences for their actions, Pinnacle Tech's professional standards had been upheld, and I had demonstrated that the company's new ownership would not tolerate policy violations. But seeing David's shocked expression and Amanda's tears had reminded me that real people were affected by these decisions, even when those people had betrayed my trust. "What happens next?" Hayes asked. "Do you want to make any other immediate changes, or should we focus on stabilizing operations and planning for growth?" The question brought me back to the future rather than dwelling on the events of the day. Pinnacle Tech Solutions was now my company, with over 200 employees depending on strategic decisions I would make over the coming months and years. The personal satisfaction of confronting David and Amanda's betrayal was secondary to the responsibility I had assumed for the company's continued success. "Let's focus on growth," I decided. "We have a solid foundation, strong client relationships, and opportunities for expansion that haven't been fully explored. The personnel changes we made today were necessary, but they're behind us now. I want to concentrate on building the company's future." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 2 weeks. I had discovered my husband's affair, acquired a technology company, and terminated both perpetrators of the betrayal that had triggered this chain of events. David would be arriving home shortly, presumably to pack his belongings and find alternative living arrangements. Amanda would be explaining to her family and friends why she had suddenly lost her job and her relationship. The house in Scottsdale felt different when I arrived. No longer the comfortable home I had shared with someone I trusted, but rather a way station before whatever came next in my transformed life. I had acquired a company, demonstrated my power to impose consequences for betrayal, and established myself as someone who would not be underestimated or taken for granted. But I also knew that David and Amanda wouldn't simply disappear quietly into the night. People who had been publicly humiliated and professionally damaged rarely accepted such consequences without attempting to fight back. The war was far from over, and I needed to prepare for whatever counterattacks they might launch against me personally or professionally. The next phase of this conflict would test not just my financial resources and strategic thinking, but also my ability to defend the reputation and relationships I had built over years of careful work. David knew things about my business and personal life that could be weaponized against me. Amanda had access to information about Pinnacle Tech's operations and clients that could be used to damage the company I now owned. I had won the first battle by demonstrating that actions have consequences, but the war for my reputation, my company, and my future was just beginning. The following weeks brought a series of escalating conflicts that tested every aspect of my strategic planning and personal resolve. David and Amanda, having lost their jobs and been publicly humiliated, launched a coordinated campaign designed to damage both my reputation and Pinnacle Tech's business relationships. Their attacks were sophisticated, targeting my professional credibility, personal character, and the financial relationships that had taken years to build. David's first move was predictably emotional and ultimately self-defeating. He hired an attorney and filed for divorce, claiming that I had used my financial resources to destroy his career out of spite and jealousy. His legal filings painted me as a vindictive wife who had abused my wealth to punish him for what he characterized as a minor marital indiscretion. The documents claimed that I had manipulated Pinnacle Tech's acquisition specifically to harm him, making business decisions based on personal vendettas rather than sound financial judgment. The irony was that David's legal strategy actually strengthened my position by documenting his affair and its impact on his employment. His attorney had apparently not considered that admitting to workplace policy violations while simultaneously claiming victimhood would undermine his credibility. Stephen Walsh, my attorney, was delighted with David's approach, noting that it would make our divorce proceedings much simpler and more favorable to my interests. "He's basically admitting to adultery and professional misconduct," Stephen observed during one of our strategy sessions. "His claim that you acquired Pinnacle Tech solely to harm him is absurd on its face, given the sound business rationale and the clear policy violations that justified his termination. This is going to be one of the easier divorce cases I've handled." But David's legal maneuvering was only the beginning of a more comprehensive attack on my reputation and business relationships. Within days of his termination, rumors began circulating throughout Phoenix's business community that I was an unstable individual who used my wealth to destroy people who crossed me personally. The stories suggested that I had a pattern of vindictive behavior, that clients should be cautious about trusting someone who might turn on them during disagreements, and that my acquisition of Pinnacle Tech was evidence of poor judgment and emotional instability. These rumors were clearly coordinated and strategically targeted. They reached my most important clients within days, all carrying similar themes and specific details that suggested a common source. Monica Bailey was among the first to warn me about the Whisper campaign, having heard concerns about my erratic behavior from 3 different sources at a charity fundraiser. "Someone is working very hard to damage your reputation," Monica told me during an emergency meeting at her office. "The stories are too consistent and too widespread to be accidental. They're hitting all the themes that would concern potential clients: emotional instability, poor judgment, using business, relationships for personal revenge. You need to get ahead of this before it does permanent damage." My investigation into the source of these rumors led directly to Amanda Foster, who had apparently spent her severance period networking throughout Phoenix's professional community. Amanda was smart, well-connected through her role as Richard Hayes's executive assistant, and motivated by a combination of genuine anger and practical desperation. Having lost her job and her relationship, she was apparently determined to ensure that I paid a comparable price for exposing her affair. Amanda's approach was sophisticated and difficult to counter directly. Rather than making obviously false accusations that could be legally challenged, she was spreading concerns about my emotional stability and business judgment that were hard to disprove. She would mention to mutual acquaintances that she was worried about Rachel's recent behavior, suggest that my acquisition of Pinnacle Tech seemed impulsive and poorly considered, and express concern for the employees who now have to work for someone who makes major decisions based on personal grievances. The effectiveness of Amanda's campaign became clear when 2 of my smaller clients requested meetings to discuss their concerns about recent developments in my personal life. Both conversations were diplomatically phrased, but carried an unmistakable message. They were questioning whether I could be trusted to manage their investments objectively if I was prone to making major business decisions based on personal emotions. Margaret Chen, who managed a family trust worth approximately $4 million, was particularly direct in her concerns. "Rachel, I've heard some troubling things about your recent acquisition of that technology company. People are saying you bought it specifically to get revenge on your husband for his affair. That kind of decision-making makes me wonder if you might someday use my money in ways that serve your personal interests rather than mine." The conversation was painful, Because Margaret had been one of my earliest clients, someone who had trusted me when I was still building my reputation and proving my capabilities. Her questions weren't unreasonable from her perspective, but they stung because they mischaracterized both my motivations and my professional integrity. I spent over an hour explaining the business rationale behind the Pinnacle Tech acquisition, showing her the financial analysis and strategic planning that had driven my decision. The personal situation with David was certainly a factor in the timing, I admitted, but the investment fundamentals were sound regardless of my marriage. I wouldn't risk my professional reputation or my client's trust by making emotionally driven decisions with this kind of money. You've seen my track record over the past 4 years, Margaret. Have I ever made a decision that didn't serve your financial interests? Margaret seemed reassured by our conversation, but the fact that it was necessary represented a serious threat to my business. If Amanda's whisper campaign continued to spread doubt about my judgment and stability, I could lose clients who had taken years to acquire and whose trust was essential to my continued success. Worse, the rumors could make it difficult to attract new clients, limiting my ability to grow the investment consulting practice that funded my lifestyle and provided the resources for strategic opportunities like the Pinnacle Tech acquisition. Thomas Rivera, the business broker who had helped coordinate the Pinnacle Tech purchase, provided additional intelligence about Amanda's activities. She's been making the rounds at every professional networking event in town, he reported during a confidential phone call. Real estate brokers, financial advisors, attorneys, accountants, anyone who might know your clients or potential clients. She's not saying anything obviously false, but she's raising questions about your judgment and suggesting that people should be cautious about doing business with you. The sophistication of Amanda's approach was both impressive and infuriating. She was using her knowledge of Phoenix's professional community, gained through years of working as an executive assistant, to systematically undermine my reputation, in ways that were difficult to challenge legally. Her statements were technically opinions rather than factual claims, making them protected speech that couldn't be addressed through defamation lawsuits. Meanwhile, David was pursuing his own parallel strategy focused more on financial warfare than reputational damage. His divorce filing included demands for half of all marital assets, including portions of my investment portfolio that had been built entirely through my own work. His attorney was arguing that my business success during our marriage had been enhanced by David's emotional support and household contributions, making him entitled to community property rights in assets that legally belonged to me individually. More concerning was David's attempt to claim partial ownership in Pinnacle Tech Solutions, arguing that marital funds had been used for the acquisition and that he therefore deserved an ownership stake in the company. This claim was legally baseless, given the prenuptial agreement we had signed and the clear documentation showing that the acquisition funds came from my separate property, but it represented an attempt to complicate my control of the company and potentially force a costly legal battle. Stephen Walsh was dismissive of David's financial claims, but concerned about the potential for protracted litigation. He knows he can't win on the merits, Stephen explained, but he can make this very expensive and time-consuming for you. His strategy is probably to create enough legal pressure that you'll agree to a larger settlement just to make the problems go away. The combination of Amanda's reputational attacks and David's legal maneuvering created a two-front war that required careful coordination to manage effectively. I needed to defend my business relationships while simultaneously protecting my legal and financial interests, all while continuing to run Pinnacle Tech Solutions and serve my existing investment clients. The stress was considerable, but it also clarified my resolve to demonstrate that attempting to destroy someone's life carries serious consequences. My response strategy began with a direct confrontation of the whisper campaign that was threatening my client relationships. Rather than allowing Amanda's insinuations to spread unchallenged, I decided to address the situation proactively with my most important clients and professional contacts. This required a delicate balance between providing context for recent events and maintaining appropriate discretion about personal matters. I scheduled individual meetings with my top 10 clients, explaining the situation honestly while emphasizing the business rationale behind my decisions. These conversations were uncomfortable but necessary, giving me the opportunity to directly address concerns rather than allowing rumors to fester unchallenged. Most clients appreciated the transparency and reaffirmed their confidence in my professional judgment, though a few remained cautious about the implications of my personal situation. Grace Kim proved invaluable during this period, helping coordinate client communications and manage the increased demands on my time. Her loyalty and discretion were unwavering, even as she fielded increasingly aggressive calls from attorneys, reporters, and curious acquaintances seeking information about my personal life and business decisions. "People are really trying to dig up dirt on you," Grace observed after a particularly busy day of deflecting inappropriate inquiries. Someone called pretending to be a potential client, but their questions were clearly designed to get information about your financial situation and client relationships. "I think David or Amanda might be feeding information to people who are trying to find ways to damage your business." This intelligence led me to implement enhanced security measures for both my personal and professional activities. I hired a cybersecurity consultant to review my digital communications and computer systems, ensuring that David couldn't access sensitive information about my clients or business operations. I also engaged a reputation management firm that specialized in protecting executives and business owners from coordinated attack campaigns. The reputation management team, led by a former journalist named Sandra Martinez, provided strategic advice about responding to rumors and controlling narrative flow throughout Phoenix's professional community. "The key," Sandra explained, "is getting your side of the story out there before the opposition can completely control the conversation. We need to reframe this from being about personal revenge to being about professional accountability and business success." Sandra's team developed a coordinated communications strategy that highlighted my track record as an investor, the sound business rationale behind the Pinnacle Tech acquisition, and the company's improving performance under new ownership. They arranged strategic interviews with business publications, speaking opportunities at professional conferences, and carefully orchestrated social media content that reinforced positive themes about my expertise and integrity. The centerpiece of this communications offensive was a feature article in Phoenix Business Journal that profiled my investment success and the strategic vision behind acquiring Pinnacle Tech Solutions. The article portrayed me as a savvy investor who had identified an undervalued company with significant growth potential, downplaying personal motivations while emphasizing the business fundamentals that justified the acquisition. Thompson's portfolio has generated consistent above-market returns for her clients over the past 6 years, the article noted, demonstrating the analytical skills and strategic thinking that made her acquisition of Pinnacle Tech a logical extension of her investment expertise. The company has already shown improved performance metrics under her ownership, validating the business case for the purchase. The article also included quotes from satisfied clients and industry experts who vouched for my professional capabilities and ethical standards. Monica Bailey was particularly effective in countering Amanda's insinuations, describing me as one of the most thoughtful and disciplined investors I've ever worked with, someone who makes decisions based on careful analysis rather than emotional impulses. While my communications team was working to repair reputational damage, I was also taking direct action to demonstrate Pinnacle Tech's continued success and growth under my ownership. The company's first quarter results under my leadership showed increased revenues, improved profit margins, and successful implementation of several strategic initiatives that I had identified during the acquisition process. These results were particularly satisfying because they validated my investment thesis and undermined suggestions that I had purchased the company for purely personal reasons. If Pinnacle Tech had been an emotional acquisition driven by revenge rather than business logic, it would be struggling under my leadership. Instead, the company was thriving, which strengthened my credibility and weakened Amanda's attacks on my judgment. Richard Hayes was instrumental in communicating Pinnacle Tech's success to the broader business community. As CEO, he had credibility with clients, employees, and industry observers who might be skeptical of my motives. His public statements about the company's improved performance and strategic direction helped counter narratives about instability or poor leadership. Rachel Thompson has brought a level of strategic thinking and financial resources that we never had before, Hayes told a technology industry conference. The growth initiatives we're implementing would have been impossible without her investment and vision. This is exactly the kind of partnership that successful companies need to reach their full potential. The legal battle with David was proceeding. Simultaneously with these reputational and business challenges, requiring constant coordination with Stephen Walsh to ensure that my divorce strategy supported rather than undermined my professional objectives. Stephen's approach was to demonstrate that David's claims were both legally baseless and factually ridiculous, while positioning me as the reasonable party who was willing to provide fair compensation for legitimate marital assets. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Stephen assured me during one of our strategy sessions. David's claims to your separate property and business assets have no legal foundation. His attorney knows this, which means they're hoping to pressure you into a settlement by making the litigation expensive and disruptive. Our strategy was to force the divorce proceedings to move quickly rather than allowing David's legal team to drag out the process indefinitely. Stephen filed motions for summary judgment on key issues, demanding immediate resolution of claims that were clearly without merit. This approach required upfront legal costs but promised to minimize the long-term disruption to my business and personal life. The most dramatic confrontation came during a mandatory mediation session designed to resolve outstanding divorce issues without requiring a full trial. The mediation was held at a downtown law office with David and his attorney on one side of a large conference table while Stephen and I sat on the other. A professional mediator, retired Judge Patricia Williams, presided over the session with the goal of finding mutually acceptable solutions to our disputes. David looked different than he had during our marriage, older and more haggard in a way that suggested the stress of recent months had taken a toll on his appearance and demeanor. He avoided making eye contact with me during the initial pleasantries, focusing instead on documents and whispered conversations with his attorney. Amanda was not present, but her influence was clearly felt in the aggressive posture that David's legal team had adopted. The mediation began with each side presenting their position on the major disputed issues: property division, spousal support, and David's claims regarding Pinnacle Tech Solutions. David's attorney, a woman named Linda Morrison who had a reputation for aggressive divorce litigation, argued that I had used marital assets to fund a business acquisition motivated by personal revenge rather than sound investment principles. Ms. Thompson's purchase of Pinnacle Tech Solutions was clearly designed to harm my client professionally and personally, Morrison argued. The timing, immediately after discovering her husband's relationship with another employee, demonstrates that this was an emotional reaction rather than a business decision. My client is entitled to protection from this kind of vindictive behavior. Stephen's response was methodical and devastating. He presented the business analysis I had conducted months before discovering David's affair, showing that Pinnacle Tech had been identified as an attractive investment opportunity based purely on financial metrics and strategic potential. He documented the timeline of the acquisition process, demonstrating that serious negotiations had begun before I learned about David's infidelity. The suggestion that Ms. Thompson acquired a $50 million company out of spite is absurd. On its face, Stephen argued. This was a carefully analyzed business investment that has already generated positive returns for her and improved performance for the acquired company. The fact that Mr. Chen's employment was terminated following clear policy violations is a separate matter that any responsible business owner would have handled identically. The mediator asked pointed questions about David's conduct at Pinnacle Tech and the company policies that his relationship with Amanda had violated. When presented with the photographic evidence and documentation of their affair, Judge Williams visibly shifted her assessment of the situation. It became clear that David's claims of victimization were difficult to maintain when confronted with evidence of his own misconduct. "Mr. Chen," Judge Williams asked directly, "are you acknowledging that you violated your employer's policies regarding workplace relationships by failing to disclose your romantic involvement with Ms. Foster?" David's response was evasive and, ultimately, self-incriminating. "The policies seemed like an invasion of privacy," he said. "Amanda and I didn't think our personal relationship affected our professional performance." This answer undermined his entire legal strategy by confirming that he had knowingly violated company policies while claiming that his termination was unjustified. Judge Williams noted that employers have both the right and the responsibility to enforce policy compliance, particularly when violations create potential liability issues. The mediation session lasted over 8 hours, with breaks for private consultation between each party and their attorneys. During these private sessions, Stephen made it clear that we were prepared to proceed to trial if David continued to pursue unreasonable demands. The evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor, and protracted litigation would only increase his legal costs while delaying the inevitable resolution. By late afternoon, David's position had become untenable. The mediator had rejected his claims to any portion of my separate property or Pinnacle Tech ownership, finding no legal basis for community property rights in assets that were clearly documented as my individual investments. His demands for significant spousal support were similarly dismissed, given his earning capacity and the brief duration of our marriage. The final settlement terms were far more favorable to my interests than David had initially demanded. He received a modest cash payment representing his share of genuinely joint assets accumulated during our marriage, but no claim to my investment, portfolio, business interests, or separate property acquired before or during the marriage. Most importantly, he was required to sign confidentiality agreements, preventing him from making public statements about our divorce or my business activities. As we left the mediation session, David made one final attempt at reconciliation that revealed how completely he had misunderstood the situation. "Rachel," he said quietly as we waited for the elevator, "this doesn't have to end like this. We could still work things out if you're willing to be reasonable about Amanda. People make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we have to destroy everything we built together." I looked at him for a moment, remembering the man I had thought I married, and comparing him to the person who had betrayed my trust while using my money to fund his affair. "David," I replied calmly, "we didn't build anything together. I built a successful business while you built a relationship with your secretary. Now we're both living with the consequences of our choices." The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside alone, leaving David standing in the law office lobby with his attorney and the wreckage of his attempts to benefit from the marriage he had destroyed through his own actions. Amanda's campaign against my reputation continued even after David's legal options had been exhausted, but her effectiveness diminished as the business community saw concrete evidence of my success and stability. Pinnacle Tech's continued growth, and my expanding client base provided tangible proof that I was a competent professional rather than the emotionally unstable individual she had portrayed in her whisper campaign. The turning point came when Amanda overplayed her hand by directly contacting several of my clients with more explicit accusations about my character and business practices. These contacts crossed the line from protected opinion into potential defamation, giving me legal recourse that I had previously lacked. More importantly, the clients she contacted were offended by her inappropriate outreach and reported her behavior to me directly. "Someone called my office claiming to be concerned about your mental health," reported James Peterson, a real estate developer whose portfolio I had managed for 3 years. "She suggested that I should consider finding a new investment advisor because you were prone to making irrational decisions based on personal vendettas. I told her that my experience with you has been nothing but professional and profitable, and that she should stop calling my office with gossip about my business relationships." Similar reports came from other clients, revealing that Amanda's campaign had become desperate and counterproductive. Rather than raising legitimate concerns about my professional judgment, she was now making personal attacks that reflected poorly on her own credibility and character. The business community's reaction was increasingly negative toward her tactics rather than receptive to her message. Stephen Walsh advised me that Amanda's direct contact with my clients provided grounds for a harassment lawsuit that could result in significant financial damages and a court order preventing further interference with my business relationships. "She's crossed the line from expressing opinions to actively trying to damage your livelihood," he explained. "That gives us legal options that didn't exist when she was just spreading rumors at cocktail parties." Before pursuing legal action, I decided to confront Amanda directly with one final opportunity to cease her campaign against me. I arranged to meet her at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix, choosing a public location where our conversation could be witnessed but private enough for frank discussion. Amanda agreed to the meeting, perhaps curious about what I might offer to end the conflict between us. She arrived looking defiant, but also tired, clearly worn down by months of anger and the practical challenges of finding new employment while dealing with the notoriety of her affair with David. Amanda had been an attractive woman during her time at Pinnacle Tech, but stress and bitterness had taken a visible toll on her appearance and demeanor. "What do you want, Rachel?" she asked without preamble as we sat across from each other at a small table. "Are you here to gloat about destroying my career and my relationship?" I studied her for a moment, remembering the woman who had seemed so confident and in control when she was carrying on her affair with my husband. "I'm here to give you a chance to end this destructively for both of us," I replied. "Your campaign against my reputation is failing, Amanda. My clients trust me, my business is growing, and you're only damaging your own credibility by continuing to make personal attacks." Amanda's laugh was bitter and humorless. "You think you've won, don't you? You bought a company just to fire me and David, destroyed our relationship, and now you want me to quietly disappear so you can pretend this never happened." "I bought a company because it was a sound investment," I corrected. "I fired you and David because you violated workplace policies and created liability for the company. Your relationship was destroyed by your own choices, not by my actions. I'm not asking you to pretend anything never happened, Amanda. I'm asking you to accept responsibility for your actions and move on with your life." She stared at me with undisguised hatred. "You had everything, Rachel. A successful business, a beautiful home, a husband who cared about you. But that wasn't enough, was it? You had to have complete control, had to make sure that anyone who crossed you paid the price." Her perception of the situation was so distorted that I almost felt sorry for her. "I had a marriage built on lies and financial deception," I replied quietly. "David used money I earned to fund your relationship while lying to me about where he was and what he was doing. You participated in that deception while violating your professional obligations. Neither of you seemed to consider how your actions might affect me until you faced consequences." Amanda's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that some part of her recognized the truth in what I was saying. But her anger was too deep, and her sense of victimization too strong for rational discussion. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You've destroyed both our careers and our relationship. David can't find decent work because everyone knows what happened. I can't get hired anywhere because of your reputation management campaign. Isn't that enough revenge for you?" The question revealed how completely she misunderstood my motivations and objectives. This had never been about revenge in the sense she meant, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing consequences imposed for actions that had caused me significant pain and betrayal. "This isn't about revenge, Amanda," I said honestly. "It's about accountability. You and David made choices that hurt other people and violated professional standards. The consequences you're experiencing are the natural result of those choices." I leaned forward slightly, making sure she understood the seriousness of what I was about to say. But if you continue trying to damage my business and reputation, I will pursue every legal option available to protect myself. That includes harassment, lawsuits, defamation claims, and restraining orders if necessary. You can choose to move on with your life, or you can choose to make this situation much worse for yourself. Amanda stared at me for a long moment, clearly weighing her options, and considering the implications of continued warfare against someone with significantly more resources and legal protections. "And if I stop?" she asked finally. "Then you stop," I replied simply. "I have no interest in your life or activities as long as they don't interfere with mine. Find a new job, start over somewhere else, build whatever kind of future you want. Just do it without trying to destroy what I've built." She nodded slowly, and I sensed that the fight was finally going out of her. The months of anger and conflict had been exhausting for both of us, and Amanda seemed to recognize that continued resistance would only make her situation worse. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," I replied, standing to leave. "But understand that my patience has limits, and my attorney has already prepared the paperwork for legal action if it becomes necessary." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing throughout the months of conflict and legal maneuvering. Amanda's campaign against me would likely continue to diminish as she focused on rebuilding her own life rather than destroying mine. David's legal options had been exhausted, leaving him to deal with the practical consequences of his choices without further disrupting my business or personal plans. The war that had begun with a betrayal on our anniversary was finally drawing to a close, with clear winners and losers determined by the choices each of us had made when tested by crisis and opportunity. Part 4. The Final Showdown. 3 months after my confrontation with Amanda at the coffee shop, the silence was deafening. No more whispered rumors at networking events, no more mysterious phone calls to my clients, no more coordinated attacks on my professional reputation. The absence of conflict felt strange after months of constant warfare, leaving me to focus entirely on building the future I had envisioned when I first decided to acquire Pinnacle Tech Solutions. The company's transformation under my ownership had exceeded even my optimistic projections. Revenue had increased by 37% in the first quarter, driven by aggressive expansion into new markets and strategic partnerships that Richard Hayes had been too conservative to pursue. Our client retention rate was at an all-time high, with several major accounts increasing their service commitments based on improved performance and innovative solutions we had developed. More satisfying than the financial success was the cultural transformation within Pinnacle Tech. The removal of David and Amanda had eliminated a source of workplace tension that had been more disruptive than anyone realized. Employees reported higher job satisfaction, improved collaboration between departments, and a renewed sense of purpose that came from working for a company with clear leadership and ambitious goals. Grace Kim had accepted my offer to become Pinnacle Tech's Director of Strategic Operations, a role that utilized her organizational skills and attention to detail while giving her significant responsibility for coordinating our expansion initiatives. Her transition from personal assistant to corporate executive represented the kind of opportunity that successful companies create for talented individuals, and her success validated my belief in promoting from within whenever possible. "The difference in workplace atmosphere is remarkable," Grace told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "People actually seem excited about coming to work now. The gossip and tension that used to distract everyone has disappeared, and the focus is entirely on serving clients and growing the business." Richard Hayes had proven to be an ideal partner in leading Pinnacle Tech's transformation. His industry experience and operational expertise complemented my strategic vision and financial resources, creating a management team that was more effective than either of us could have been individually. Hayes had initially been cautious about aggressive expansion plans, but the success of our early initiatives had convinced him that calculated risks were necessary for sustained growth. "I've been too conservative for too long," Hayes admitted during a board meeting where we were reviewing plans for acquiring two smaller software companies. I was so focused on avoiding mistakes that I missed opportunities for significant growth. Your willingness to invest in expansion has shown me what's possible when you have the resources and vision to pursue ambitious goals. The acquisition strategy we developed focused on purchasing complementary businesses that would expand Pinnacle Tech's service offerings and geographic reach. Rather than competing directly with larger software companies, we were positioning ourselves as a comprehensive solution provider for mid-sized businesses that needed sophisticated technology support without the complexity and cost of enterprise-level systems. Our first acquisition target was a customer relationship management software company based in Denver, with annual revenues of $8 million and a client base that perfectly complemented our existing accounts. The second target was a Phoenix-based cybersecurity firm that would allow us to offer comprehensive digital protection services to clients who were increasingly concerned about data security and privacy. Both acquisitions were structured as strategic purchases rather than hostile takeovers, with the existing management teams remaining in place and the founders receiving equity stakes in the combined company. This approach preserved the entrepreneurial culture that had made these businesses successful while providing them with the resources and support needed for accelerated growth. The financial structuring of these acquisitions demonstrated how dramatically my personal wealth had grown through successful investing and business operations. The combined purchase price of $15 million represented less than 20% of my current net worth, leaving substantial resources for additional expansion opportunities and strategic investments. Monica Bailey continued to serve as both client and advisor, helping me navigate the transition from investment consultant to operating executive. Her experience building and selling companies provided valuable guidance on managing growth, developing talent, and maintaining the focus necessary for long-term success. The key to successful expansion, Monica counseled, is maintaining the culture and values that made you successful in the first place. It's easy to lose sight of what matters when you're growing rapidly, but the companies that sustain their success are the ones that stay true to their fundamental principles while adapting to new opportunities. This advice proved particularly relevant as Pinnacle Tech's success attracted increasing attention from competitors, potential clients, and industry observers who wanted to understand how a relatively small company had achieved such dramatic growth in a short period. Several business publications requested interviews about our expansion strategy and management philosophy, creating opportunities to establish thought leadership while building brand recognition. The most significant recognition came when Phoenix Business Journal named me Executive of the Year for my role in transforming Pinnacle Tech Solutions from a stable but stagnant company into one of Arizona's fastest-growing technology firms. The award ceremony was held at the Arizona Biltmore, with over 500 business leaders attending to celebrate achievements in various categories. Standing at the podium to accept the award, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a year. 12 months earlier, I had been the overlooked wife of a cheating husband, financially successful but personally diminished by a marriage that had become a source of constant disappointment. Now, I was being recognized as one of Phoenix's most accomplished business leaders, having built a company that employed over 300 people and generated revenues exceeding $70 million annually. Success in business, I told the audience, requires more than just financial resources or strategic vision. It requires the courage to make difficult decisions when those decisions serve the long-term interests of your company and stakeholders, even when those decisions are personally challenging or professionally risky. The speech was carefully crafted to emphasize business principles rather than personal circumstances, but everyone in the audience understood the subtext. My acquisition of Pinnacle Tech had been motivated by personal betrayal, but its success had been achieved through professional competence and strategic leadership. The transformation of the company validated my business judgment, while demonstrating that emotional motivations could lead to rational outcomes when channeled through disciplined execution. Among the audience members that evening were several people who had played important roles in the events of the past year. Richard Hayes sat at our company table, beaming with pride at the recognition being given to our collective achievements. Monica Bailey was there as well, having been nominated in the Investor of the Year category for her own successful portfolio management. Thomas Rivera, the business broker who had facilitated the Pinnacle Tech acquisition, attended as a guest of another nominee. More surprisingly, I spotted David sitting at a table near the back of the ballroom. He looked older and more subdued than I remembered, wearing a suit that was professional but not quite as expensive as those he had worn during our marriage. His presence at the ceremony was puzzling until I realized he was probably there as someone's guest, perhaps a colleague from whatever new job he had managed to secure after leaving Pinnacle Tech. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and I saw a complex mixture of emotions in his expression: regret, resentment, and what might have been a grudging acknowledgement of my success. David had bet his future on a relationship with Amanda Foster and had lost everything that mattered to him professionally and personally. Meanwhile, the woman he had called worthless was being celebrated as one of Arizona's most successful business executives. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, David approached me near the bar where I was accepting congratulations from various business associates. He waited patiently until there was a brief lull in the conversation, then stepped forward with the cautious manner of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "Rachel," he said quietly, "congratulations on the award. You've obviously done amazing things with Pinnacle Tech. I wanted to acknowledge that and wish you continued success." The graciousness of his approach surprised me, suggesting that the month since our divorce had given him time to reflect on the consequences of his choices. David had always been capable of charm when he wanted to be, but this seemed different, more genuine and less calculated than the manipulative behavior I had experienced during our marriage. "Thank you, David," I replied cordially. "I hope you're doing well in your new position." I had heard through professional networks that he had found work with a smaller technology consulting firm, though at a significantly lower salary and with considerably less responsibility than he had enjoyed at Pinnacle Tech. "I am," he said, though his tone suggested that doing well was a relative assessment. "It's been an adjustment, but I'm learning from the experience. I wanted to apologize again for how everything ended between us. I made some very poor choices, and I understand now how much damage those choices caused." The apology felt more sincere than his previous attempts at reconciliation, perhaps because it came without any expectation of forgiveness or benefit. David seemed to genuinely understand that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate betrayal of our marriage vows. "I appreciate that, David," I said, meaning it more than I had expected. "We both learned things about ourselves and each other that were probably necessary, even if the process was painful." He nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't going to publicly embarrass him or reject his attempt at civil conversation. "What you've accomplished is really impressive, Rachel. I always knew you were smart and capable, but I don't think I fully appreciated how talented you are until I saw what you did with Pinnacle Tech." The comment revealed how completely David had misunderstood me during our marriage. He had seen my success as a comfortable supplement to his own career, rather than recognizing that I was a formidable business leader in my own right. His surprise at my achievement said more about his limited perception than about my capabilities. "Thank you," I said simply. "I hope you find opportunities to build the kind of success you're looking for in your new situation." Our conversation was interrupted by Monica Bailey, who approached with a warm smile and obvious curiosity about the interaction she was witnessing. "Rachel, I hate to interrupt, but there are some people from the Arizona Technology Council who would like to meet you. They're interested in discussing your participation in their upcoming conference on women in technology leadership." The interruption provided a natural end to my conversation with David, who stepped back with a polite nod and disappeared into the crowd. As Monica and I walked toward the Technology Council representatives, she gave me a knowing look that suggested she had recognized David and understood the significance of our brief exchange. "That was your ex-husband, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. "He looked appropriately humbled by your success. I hope he's learned something from the experience of losing someone as accomplished as you." The Technology Council representatives were enthusiastic about having me speak at their conference, seeing my story as an inspiring example of how women could succeed in male-dominated industries through strategic thinking and decisive action. Their interest reflected the broader recognition that my transformation of Pinnacle Tech represented more than just business success. It demonstrated leadership qualities that could inspire other women to pursue ambitious goals in technology and entrepreneurship. As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment of professional recognition and personal satisfaction. The betrayal that had initially seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me had actually become the catalyst for achievements that exceeded anything I had previously imagined possible. Standing in the Arizona Biltmore's elegant ballroom, surrounded by Phoenix's business elite, and holding an award that recognized my professional accomplishments, I realized that David's affair had inadvertently given me something more valuable than a faithful marriage. It had forced me to discover my own strength, independence, and capacity for strategic thinking under pressure. The following weeks brought a steady stream of new opportunities that reflected my elevated status in Phoenix's business community. Investment firms wanted to recruit me as a partner. Technology companies sought my advice on strategic planning, and business schools invited me to lecture on entrepreneurship and corporate transformation. Each opportunity represented choices about how to leverage my success for continued growth and impact. Most intriguing was an offer from a national private equity firm that specialized in technology acquisitions. They wanted me to lead their Southwest region operations, identifying and acquiring companies that could benefit from strategic investment and operational improvement. The role would provide substantial resources for pursuing larger deals, while allowing me to apply the lessons learned from transforming Pinnacle Tech to other businesses with similar potential. "It's a natural evolution of what you've been doing," explained Jennifer Walsh, the managing partner who had flown in from New York to present the opportunity. "You've demonstrated the ability to identify undervalued companies, implement strategic improvements, and generate exceptional returns. Our firm can provide the resources to pursue much larger transactions while giving you significant autonomy in deal selection and execution." The financial terms were compelling: a base salary that exceeded my current income, equity participation in successful deals, and expense accounts that would support a lifestyle of considerable luxury. More importantly, the role would establish me as a major player in the national private equity market, opening doors to opportunities that would have been impossible to pursue as an independent investor. However, accepting the position would require relocating to either New York or San Francisco, leaving behind the life I had built in Phoenix and the company I had worked so hard to transform. Pinnacle Tech was performing well under Richard Hayes' operational leadership, but I wasn't sure I was ready to step away from direct involvement in the business that had become such an important part of my identity. The decision was complicated by another opportunity that had emerged from my growing reputation in the technology sector. The governor of Arizona had approached me about leading a state initiative to attract technology companies to relocate their operations to Phoenix, offering tax incentives and infrastructure support in exchange for job creation and economic development. The role would combine business development with public service, leveraging my success to benefit the broader community while maintaining my residence in the city I had come to love. Both opportunities represented significant departures from my current path, requiring careful consideration of what I wanted to achieve in the next phase of my career and personal life. The private equity role offered the potential for enormous financial returns and national recognition, while the state economic development position provided the satisfaction of public service and community impact. As I weighed these choices, I found myself thinking about Amanda Foster, and wondering what had become of her since our confrontation at the coffee shop. Her silence had been complete since that meeting, suggesting that she had indeed chosen to focus on rebuilding her own life rather than continuing to attack mine. The absence of conflict had allowed me to concentrate entirely on building Pinnacle Tech's success, but I was curious about whether Amanda had found the fresh start she needed. My curiosity was satisfied when Grace Kim mentioned seeing Amanda at a Whole Foods in Scottsdale, apparently living in the area and working for a nonprofit organization that provided job training and placement services for women re-entering the workforce. The job represented a significant step down from her previous role as executive assistant to a CEO, but it also suggested that she had found meaningful work that utilized her skills while serving a worthwhile cause. She looked different, Grace observed. More relaxed, maybe more genuine than she used to be at Pinnacle Tech. I think the experience of losing everything might have been good for her in some ways, forcing her to figure out what really mattered to her. The observation resonated with my own experience of transformation through adversity. My discovery of David's betrayal had initially felt like a devastating personal failure, but it had ultimately led to achievements and self-discovery that would have been impossible within the confines of my previous marriage. Perhaps Amanda's fall from corporate success to nonprofit work had similarly forced her to confront fundamental questions about her values and priorities. David's situation was less clear, though occasional reports from mutual acquaintances suggested that he was struggling with both professional and personal adjustments. His new job paid significantly less than his previous position at Pinnacle Tech, requiring him to downsize his lifestyle and abandon the expensive tastes he had cultivated during our marriage. More significantly, his reputation within Phoenix's technology community had been damaged by the circumstances of his termination, making it difficult to find opportunities comparable to what he had lost. The personal costs of his affair extended beyond career setbacks. David's relationship with Amanda had ended badly, with mutual recriminations about who was responsible for the disaster that had engulfed both their lives. He was now living alone in a modest apartment, having lost his marriage, his girlfriend, his job, and most of his financial security through a series of choices that had seemed manageable when they were happening, but had proven catastrophic in their cumulative impact. These reports about David's struggles didn't give me the satisfaction I might have expected during the early days of my anger and hurt. Instead, they reinforced my sense that everyone involved in the events of the past year had paid appropriate prices for their choices, and that continued focus on past grievances would only distract from the opportunities that lay ahead. The decision about my future direction crystallized during a conversation with Richard Hayes about Pinnacle Tech's long-term strategic planning. Hayes had proven to be an exceptional CEO, but he was also 62 years old and beginning to think about succession planning and retirement goals. Our discussion revealed that he was interested in gradually reducing his operational responsibilities while maintaining an ownership stake and advisory role in the company's continued growth. "I've been thinking about this for months," Hayes confided during a private dinner at the Phoenician. "Running Pinnacle Tech has been the most rewarding experience of my career, but I'm ready to step back and enjoy some of the success we've built. The question is whether you're ready to take on the CEO role full-time, or if we need to recruit someone externally to lead the next phase of growth." The offer to become Pinnacle Tech's CEO was both flattering and daunting. The role would require me to step away from investment consulting entirely, focusing all my time and energy on building the company we had transformed over the past year. It would also mean declining the private equity opportunity and the state economic development role, committing instead to the business that had become my primary professional focus. But as I considered Hayes' proposal, I realized that leading Pinnacle Tech as CEO represented the natural evolution of everything I had been building since my divorce from David. The company had become more than just a strategic investment. It was a reflection of my vision, values, and leadership philosophy. Walking away to pursue other opportunities, however lucrative or prestigious, would mean abandoning the business that had proven my capabilities as an executive and entrepreneur. "I'm interested," I told Hayes, "but I want to structure this transition in a way that sets both of us up for long-term success. You've built something remarkable here, and I want to ensure that your legacy is preserved while positioning the company for continued growth." Over the following weeks, we negotiated a succession plan that would gradually transfer operational control while maintaining Hayes' involvement as executive chairman and strategic advisor. The arrangement would allow him to reduce his day-to-day responsibilities while preserving his institutional knowledge and client relationships. Most importantly, it would give me complete authority to pursue the aggressive expansion strategy we had developed while benefiting from his experience and wisdom. The announcement of my promotion to CEO was scheduled for a company-wide meeting on a Friday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after I had first walked into Pinnacle Tech as its new majority owner. The timing was deliberate, marking the anniversary of my transformation from betrayed wife to successful business leader, with a celebration of continued growth and future opportunities. As I prepared for the announcement, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 12 months earlier, I had been humiliated at an anniversary dinner, discovering that my husband was having an affair with his secretary while using my money to fund their relationship. My response had seemed impulsive at the time. Buying the company where they worked and firing them both for policy violations, but it had actually been the beginning of the most successful period of my professional life. The woman who had once accepted disrespect and betrayal as the price of maintaining a comfortable marriage was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary, revealing strengths and capabilities that had been dormant during years of trying to be the supportive wife that David had wanted, rather than the accomplished leader I was capable of becoming. Standing in my office on the morning of the announcement, looking out at the Phoenix skyline that had become the backdrop for my new life, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. The future held challenges and opportunities that I couldn't yet imagine, but I was confident in my ability to meet them with the strategic thinking, financial resources, and leadership skills that had carried me through the most difficult year of my life. The final showdown hadn't been a dramatic confrontation or legal battle, but rather the quiet triumph of building something valuable while others struggled with the consequences of their poor choices. David and Amanda had gambled their futures on a relationship built on deception and betrayal, while I had channeled my anger and hurt into creating genuine value for hundreds of employees, thousands of clients, and the broader Phoenix business community. As I walked toward the conference room where my colleagues were waiting to hear about Pinnacle Tech's future, I carried with me the knowledge that success is the best revenge, and that the most powerful response to betrayal is becoming the person you were always capable of being. 2 years had passed since that devastating anniversary dinner that changed the trajectory of my entire life. As I sat in the corner office that had once belonged to Richard Hayes, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Pinnacle Tech Solutions had exceeded $100 million in annual revenue, I marveled at how completely unrecognizable my world had become. The company now employed over 400 people across 3 states, had been featured on the cover of Inquirer magazine as one of America's fastest-growing technology firms, and was being courted by several Fortune 500 companies interested in strategic partnerships. The transformation hadn't just been professional, it had been deeply personal as well. The insecure woman who had once tolerated disrespect to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage had evolved into someone who commanded respect through competence, leadership, and an unwavering commitment to ethical business practices. Every decision I made as CEO was guided by principles that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal and recovery, transparency, accountability, and the understanding that true success comes from building something valuable rather than tearing others down. My daily routine reflected this transformation in countless small ways. I woke each morning in a stunning penthouse overlooking Camelback Mountain, a space I had designed to reflect my personal taste rather than compromise with someone else's preferences. The walls were decorated with awards and recognitions I had earned through my own efforts, photographs from business conferences where I had been invited as a keynote speaker, and artwork from local artists whose careers I had supported through a foundation I had established the previous year. The foundation, called Women in Technology Leadership, provided scholarships and mentorship opportunities for young women pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The initiative had grown from a personal project into a significant force for change in Arizona's educational landscape, awarding over $2 million in scholarships and supporting programs at universities throughout the Southwest. The work gave me a sense of purpose that transcended business success, creating opportunities for others to achieve the kind of independence and professional fulfillment that had transformed my own life. Grace Kim had flourished in her role as Director of Strategic Operations, becoming one of my most trusted advisors and a rising star in Phoenix's technology community. Her success validated my belief in promoting talented individuals from within the organization, and her loyalty during the difficult early months of my ownership had been rewarded with equity participation that made her financially secure for life. "You know what I love most about working here?" Grace had told me during our recent performance reviews. "It's not just that you gave me opportunities I never could have imagined. It's that you created a culture where competence and character matter more than politics or personal relationships. People actually focus on doing excellent work instead of worrying about office drama." Her observation captured something essential about the workplace culture we had built at Pinnacle Tech. The removal of David and Amanda had eliminated more than just two individuals who had violated company policies. It had sent a clear message that professional conduct and ethical behavior were non-negotiable requirements for continued employment. The result was an environment where talented people could focus entirely on serving clients and building the business without the distractions and toxicity that plagued many organizations. Richard Hayes had transitioned smoothly into his role as executive chairman, maintaining involvement in strategic planning while allowing me complete operational authority. His mentorship had been invaluable during my first year as CEO, providing guidance on everything from client relationship management to board governance. More importantly, his public endorsement of my leadership had helped establish credibility with clients and industry partners who might have been skeptical of such a dramatic leadership change. "Rachel has exceeded every expectation I had when we structured this transition," Hayes had told a reporter from Arizona Business Magazine. "She's not just maintained the culture and values that made Pinnacle Tech successful, she's elevated them to a level I never could have achieved on my own." The company's growth and reputation under her leadership speaks for itself. The growth Hayes referenced was indeed remarkable. We had completed 4 strategic acquisitions over the past 18 months, each one carefully selected to expand our capabilities and geographic reach without compromising the quality standards that had become our trademark. Our client retention rate remained above 95%, and referrals from satisfied customers accounted for nearly 60% of new business development. Most satisfying was the recognition we had received from employees, clients, and industry organizations for our commitment to ethical business practices and community engagement. Pinnacle Tech had been named one of Arizona's best places to work for 2 consecutive years, received multiple awards for customer service, excellence, and been recognized by the Better Business Bureau for our commitment to transparent and honest business dealings. The personal satisfaction of building something valuable and meaningful had been accompanied by financial rewards that exceeded my most optimistic projections. My ownership stake in Pinnacle Tech was now worth considerably more than the original acquisition price, and the company's success had attracted acquisition offers from several technology conglomerates. While I had no intention of selling the business, the valuations being discussed confirmed that my decision to acquire Pinnacle Tech had been one of the most successful investments of my career. Beyond the company's value, my diversified investment portfolio had continued to grow through careful asset management and strategic positioning. The reputation I had built as a successful technology executive had opened doors to investment opportunities that weren't available to typical private investors, allowing me to participate in early-stage funding rounds for companies that showed exceptional promise. Monica Bailey remained both a client and close friend, serving on Pinnacle Tech's board of advisors and providing strategic counsel on major decisions. Her own business ventures had flourished, and our professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Monica had been instrumental in helping me navigate the transition from investment consultant to operating executive, and her support during the difficult early months of my ownership had been invaluable. "You've become everything I knew you could be," Monica had told me during a recent dinner celebration of Pinnacle Tech's latest acquisition. "But more importantly, you've become someone who lifts others up rather than just climbing higher yourself. That's the mark of true leadership." The community involvement that Monica referenced had become an increasingly important part of my identity and purpose. Beyond the Women in Technology Leadership Foundation, I served on the boards of 2 local nonprofits, mentored young entrepreneurs through the Arizona State University Business School, and regularly spoke at conferences about women's leadership in male-dominated industries. These speaking engagements had evolved from simple business presentations into something more personal and impactful. I found myself sharing the story of my transformation not as a tale of revenge, but as an example of how adversity could become the catalyst for unprecedented growth and self-discovery. The response from audiences was consistently positive, with many women approaching me afterward to share their own stories of overcoming betrayal and finding the strength to rebuild their lives. "Your story gives me hope," a young entrepreneur had told me after a presentation at a women's business conference in San Diego. "I'm going through a divorce right now, and my ex-husband is trying to claim credit for business I built myself. Hearing how you turned your worst experience into your greatest success makes me believe I can do the same thing." These conversations reminded me that my experience, while unique in its specific details, represented a universal truth about resilience and the human capacity for transformation when faced with crisis. The woman who had once tolerated disrespect to maintain a comfortable but hollow marriage had discovered reserves of strength and determination that had been dormant for years, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. The question of romantic relationships had been complicated, but ultimately rewarding. For the first year after my divorce, I had been entirely focused on building Pinnacle Tech and establishing my new identity as a CEO and community leader. The idea of trusting someone with my heart again seemed impossible, given the magnitude of David's betrayal and the vulnerability I had experienced during our marriage. But gradually, as my confidence grew and my life stabilized, I had begun to consider the possibility of finding someone who could appreciate the person I had become rather than trying to change me back into someone I used to be. The dating process had been careful and deliberate, with an emphasis on finding someone who possessed their own professional success and personal integrity, rather than seeking validation through a relationship with me. The breakthrough had come through my involvement with the Arizona State University Business School, where I had met Dr. Michael Santos, a professor of entrepreneurship who consulted with technology startups on strategic planning and market development. Michael was intelligent, accomplished, and completely unintimidated by my success or strong personality. More importantly, he seemed to genuinely admire the journey I had taken from betrayed wife to successful CEO, rather than viewing it as a cautionary tale about women who didn't know their place. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on shared interests in business strategy, community involvement, and outdoor activities that took advantage of Arizona's spectacular natural environment. Michael was secure enough in his own achievements that he could celebrate my success without feeling threatened or diminished, and his academic background provided intellectual stimulation that had been missing from my previous relationships. "What I find most attractive about you," Michael had told me during a recent hiking trip through the McDowell Mountains, is not just your professional success, but the way you've used that success to create opportunities for other people. You could have become bitter and vindictive after what David did to you, but instead you channeled that energy into building something positive and meaningful. His observation reflected a conscious choice I had made about how to respond to betrayal and adversity. The initial impulse for revenge had been natural and understandable, but sustaining that anger would have been destructive to my own growth and happiness. Instead, I had chosen to focus on building the kind of life and career that would make David's opinion irrelevant, rather than continuing to define myself in relation to his failures and limitations. This philosophy had been tested recently when David had reached out through a mutual acquaintance, requesting a meeting to discuss what he described as an important business opportunity. My initial reaction had been skepticism and reluctance, but curiosity eventually overcame caution, and I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Central Phoenix where we could have a private conversation without creating speculation or gossip. David looked different when he arrived for our meeting, older and more subdued than I remembered, but also somehow more genuine than he had been during our marriage. The expensive suits and carefully cultivated appearance had been replaced by a more modest but authentic presentation that suggested he had learned something from the consequences of his choices. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began, settling into the chair across from me with the careful manner of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "I know you don't owe me anything, and I appreciate your willingness to hear what I have to say." His tone was respectful and humble, lacking the entitlement and self-importance that had characterized much of our marriage. Whatever experiences David had endured over the past 2 years had apparently taught him something about humility and the importance of treating people with dignity regardless of what he believed he could gain from them. "I wanted to apologize again for how I treated you during our marriage, and especially for the affair with Amanda," he continued. "I've had time to think about what I did and why I did it, and I realize now that my behavior was inexcusable, regardless of whatever problems existed in our relationship. You deserved better, and I should have had the courage to address our issues honestly instead of deceiving you." The apology felt more genuine than his previous attempts, perhaps because it came without any apparent expectation of forgiveness or benefit. David seemed to understand that acknowledging his mistakes was something he needed to do for his own growth, rather than a strategy for repairing our relationship or gaining some advantage. "I also wanted to tell you how impressed I am with what you've accomplished at Pinnacle Tech," he added. "I always knew you were smart and capable, but I don't think I fully appreciated your potential until I saw what you did with the company. You've built something remarkable, and you've done it while maintaining the integrity and values that I failed to respect during our marriage." His recognition of my success was gratifying, but more importantly, it represented a level of self-awareness that had been completely absent during our marriage. David had finally recognized that his limited perception of my capabilities said more about his own insecurities than about my actual potential. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I hope you found ways to build the kind of success and fulfillment you're looking for in your own life." David nodded, then shifted to what appeared to be the real purpose of our meeting. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. I've been working with a small consulting firm that specializes in helping mid-sized companies implement new technology systems. It's good work, and I've learned a lot, but I've been thinking about starting my own practice focused on serving clients who need more personalized attention than the larger firms can provide." The business opportunity he described was legitimate and potentially viable, leveraging his experience with technology implementation while allowing him to build something that belonged to him rather than working for others. What surprised me was his apparent intention to ask for my advice rather than my financial support or business partnership. "I'm not asking for money or favors," David clarified, apparently reading my expression correctly. "I know that ship has sailed, and I wouldn't insult you by pretending otherwise. But I would appreciate your perspective on the business plan and market opportunity. You've demonstrated an ability to identify successful business models and execute growth strategies that I clearly didn't appreciate when we were married. His request was reasonable and even flattering in its implicit recognition of my business expertise. More importantly, it suggested that David had finally learned to value my judgment and insights rather than dismissing them as less important than his own opinions. We spent the next hour discussing his business concept, market analysis, and implementation strategy. The plan was solid, though not spectacular, with realistic revenue projections and a clear understanding of the competitive landscape. David had clearly learned from his experience at Pinnacle Tech and his subsequent employment, developing a more sophisticated understanding of what it took to build and sustain a successful consulting practice. "This sounds like a viable opportunity," I told him honestly. "The market exists, you have relevant experience, and your approach seems realistic about both the opportunities and challenges. If you execute well and maintain focus on client service, you should be able to build something sustainable." David's relief and gratitude were evident as we concluded our conversation. "Thank you for taking the time to review this with me," he said. "Your feedback means more than you probably realize. I know I have no right to expect anything from you, but your willingness to help me think through this opportunity shows a generosity that I certainly didn't earn." As I watched David leave the coffee shop, I reflected on how much both of us had changed since our acrimonious divorce. He had learned humility and developed a more realistic understanding of his own strengths and limitations. I had discovered reserves of strength and capability that had been suppressed during our marriage, emerging as someone who could extend grace to people who had wronged me without compromising my own interests or values. The encounter reinforced my sense that the traumatic events of 2 years ago had ultimately served everyone's long-term interests, forcing us all to confront fundamental questions about character, integrity, and what truly mattered in building a meaningful life. David had lost a marriage and career, but had apparently gained self-awareness and humility. Amanda had experienced professional and personal consequences, but had found meaningful work serving others. I had endured betrayal and public humiliation, but had discovered my true potential as a leader and entrepreneur. As I drove back to Pinnacle Tech's offices, I thought about the lessons I had learned from the entire experience. The most important insight was that other people's opinions about your worth are far less significant than your own understanding of your capabilities and values. David's assessment of me as worthless had been painful because I had allowed his perspective to influence my self-perception. But his opinion had been wrong because it was based on limited understanding and personal insecurity, rather than objective evaluation of my character and accomplishments. The second crucial lesson was that adversity, while painful in the moment, often creates opportunities for growth and self-discovery that wouldn't have been possible under more comfortable circumstances. If David had been a faithful husband and supportive partner, I might never have discovered my potential as a CEO or my passion for mentoring other women in business. The betrayal that initially seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me had actually been the catalyst for the most rewarding period of my life. Finally, I had learned that revenge is most satisfying when it takes the form of building something valuable rather than destroying what others have created. The impulse to hurt David and Amanda had been natural and understandable, but channeling that energy into growing Pinnacle Tech and supporting other women's success had been far more fulfilling than any form of retaliation could have been. Standing in my office as the sun set over the Phoenix skyline, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once accepted crumbs of attention from a cheating husband had become someone who commanded respect through competence and character. The marriage that had seemed like the foundation of my happiness had actually been constraining my potential, and its destruction had freed me to become the person I was always capable of being. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities, filled with opportunities to continue growing Pinnacle Tech, supporting other women's advancement in business, and building the kind of meaningful relationships that were based on mutual respect rather than convenience or compromise. I had learned that true security comes not from depending on others for validation or support, but from developing your own capabilities and surrounding yourself with people who appreciate your authentic self. As I prepared to leave the office and join Michael for dinner at our favorite restaurant, I smiled at the thought of how completely my life had been transformed. The anniversary that had begun with betrayal and humiliation had ultimately led to achievements and fulfillment that exceeded my most ambitious dreams. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your comfortable assumptions destroyed, forcing you to discover strengths you never knew you possessed. The journey from worthless wife to successful CEO had been painful, challenging, and ultimately triumphant. I had learned that you can't control what others do to you, but you can always control how you respond. And sometimes, the most powerful response is simply becoming the best possible version of yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.